The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Hi, everybody. It's Jason Rosenbaum, a political correspondent with St. Louis Public Radio. In early January, U.S. Senator Roy Blunt will depart from his post after close to 5 decades in public or educational service. His legacy in politics and policy is substantial. And earlier this week, we talked about the big takeaways from his time in elected office, as well as some of his more difficult challenges he's encountered. Here's my conversation with U.S. Senator Roy Blunt. So I watched your entire farewell speech in the Senate where you talked often about how working in a bipartisan way was very beneficial to your federal legislative service. I'd like you to provide some tangible examples of how you made a difference for Missouri while reaching out your hand to your ideological counterparts.
Well, I think that not only is it the way to get things done in the Senate because of the Senate rules, but I think it's one of the better things the Senate rules are likely to encourage is reaching out to somebody on the other side. You're much more likely, Jason, to have a product that will last than if it's something one side forces on the other side, and then 2 years later somebody else is in control, and they think we've got to change that thing that was totally partisan when it passed to start with. You know, the efforts in mental health, I think that Senator Stabenow and I've worked so hard on for right at a decade now, would be significant things. Missouri not only got to be one of the 8 original states, and not because of me, but because we created legislation that you could compete in to be the pilot states to see what it would look like if you treated mental health like all other health in a broad-based network. And 23 states applied, 19 states went through that process. But Missouri was one of the 8 states that got those original grants. And obviously that wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been a program for them to apply for, but they got it based on their own merit. Michigan really didn't get to be one of the 8 states. And later we were able to add the next 2 in the calculation that Health and Human Services made as to where would be the best places to do this, who had the highest level of quality on all of the things you had to have to be one of those centers. Obviously, our NIH work, Washington University is, I think, the 4th biggest recipient of NIH healthcare grants, but the University of Missouri at Columbia has made a huge commitment there to be part of that kind of work, looking at what happens now that in this next generation of healthcare, we understand that every one of us is different than all of the rest of us. And how do we use that to create the unique things that work in one case that get your ability to resist disease up higher than would be otherwise. This was not as bipartisan as was by state, but the 4 senators, particularly from Kansas and Missouri, decided when the federal government decided they were going to move the ag research jobs principally out of Washington and somewhere else in the country. There were a number of good cases to be made, but I think Missourians made the best one. And we had 573 research and analytics jobs in Kansas City, Missouri, that will have long-term impact on not only that nice boost to the economy, but also the potential of where some of that ag research is going to be first tried and first done. I think there's a pretty long list here, and infrastructure would be part of that, but all great partners. You know, the Missouri delegation, House and Senate, has worked very closely together, certainly for at least the last decade, and I think pretty closely together for the last 20 years. And that's all made a difference. We usually were able to have a unified approach to anything that was going to impact our state specifically.
Yeah, you actually touched on another question I was going to ask later, but since you're a good seguer, um, I noticed that you and Senator McCaskill were able to forge a pretty good working relationship with each other, even though she ran against your son for governor and her mom ran against your dad for state representative. And Missouri is notorious for having long-standing political grudges. How were you two able to work together with that context?
Well, we were able to work together, and and I think, in fairness, even in our own campaigns, we were more involved, I think, than might have been as healthy as it could have been, or for the opponent of somebody we're working with. But we've always had a good relationship, and frankly, we've fostered that with a good personal relationship as well. You know, when my dad died, Joe and Claire were at the memorial service. When Claire's mom died, I never thought about anything but being there. And we've spent personal time together as well, and that helps. And, you know, one of the things I think that's not very well understood about working with people effectively is you don't spend a lot of time on the things that you know you're never going to agree on. And as I said, and you heard the speech the other day, the farewell speech, the key to working with somebody, particularly in the Senate, is you don't have to agree with them on everything. You just have to agree with them on that one thing you're working together. And Senator McCaskill and I were always able to find a number of things that we were working hard on that we thought were going to be good for our state. And we were able to do that.
So what happens, though, when you are dealing with something in Congress that is centered around like a deeply held philosophical or moral belief, like abortion rights, military interventionism, the right to bear arms, racial equity, where people around those issues feel there is no such thing as a bipartisan approach? Losing on that side to them would be basically betraying their values.
Well, I think, you know, by the time you've done whatever you've done to get to the United States Senate, and normally that has been some kind of political career with a long attachment and issues, feeling strongly about issues, seeing your views develop about issues to where by the time you get here, you're pretty much where you're going to be on the kind of issues you mentioned. And I just think it doesn't do much good to assume for a minute that you're going to change somebody's mind on something like that. So the way you'd move forward on something like that would be that the majority of people that would be for that has to change. I think it's a much more daily application when you say, let's work on this one part of the immigration issue that we agree on. Let's not talk about the part we don't agree on, because this is the one thing we both agree we need to try to do our best right now to change. Though immigration may not be the best example of that, because it always gets bogged down in some comprehensive package that never goes anywhere. I think that's been our biggest single mistake with immigration. So they're probably a better example of just anything. Senator Coons from Delaware and I always work together to extend the Victims of Child Abuse Act, which interestingly rather, have a couple of times in the Obama administration, they zeroed the Victims of Child Abuse Act out, the funding for that. And, you know, we don't have to talk about all the things we don't agree on. All we have to talk about to get that done is that we do agree on that.
It does seem, for all the talk about how people want Democrats and Republicans to work together, for people who are like heavily engaged in politics, and I'm talking about voters here, they often put a value on ideological purity over compromise. How has that affected the way Congress operates in the roughly 26 years you've been either in the House or the Senate?
I think it's had a big effect. It seemed to me about 2009. Way too many people seem to keep saying in their campaigns, if I don't get exactly what I want, I won't settle for anything else, which seems to me to be the best possible way to take yourself out of almost every discussion. Because almost nobody ever wants to sign up and say, I want to help you get exactly what you want, even if it's not what I want. That is just, there's not a big group for that. And I think those people have become incredibly ineffective as legislators. Maybe they're incredibly effective as spokespersons for a point of view. And if that's why you're running for the job, I suppose there's part of the job that can be benefited by that. But I think you've got to be willing to understand that democracy doesn't work that way. That when people are stepping up to be part of a democracy, the goal there is to see how far you can move the country in the direction you'd like it to go with the other people that have been chosen to come and help make this decision. Talked to a couple of candidates this year, said, what advice do you have for me as I haven't run for office or haven't run for Congress before? And my advice was, if I was you, I'd first decide the kind of member of the Congress you want to be, what you want to, how you see yourself making the best impact here. And then don't say a lot of things in the campaign that prevent you from being that kind of member of either the House or the Senate.
What was the toughest challenge of your political career?
I think maybe some of the moments that were tough for the country, and I was in a place where I could be involved. 9/11, certainly a challenge. I got very involved in trying to figure out how we deal with the liability issue for the whole travel industry, then how we allocate the money that had been set aside to try to compensate victims. Congressman Gephardt and I worked together on that. And that model was good enough that it's been used in 3 or 4 other victim compensation decisions. Ken Feinberg, I think, was the person who was chosen to do it after 9/11 and has replicated that effort now several times. The continuity of government, how do we deal with on a going forward basis the possibility that a big portion of our government that we never anticipated before that could just be eliminated. How do we respond to that? Clearly, the 2 inaugurations that I was in charge of, very different individuals were being inaugurated, very different circumstances. The Trump inauguration, dealing with all of the issues that surround someone whose team has never really been involved in this process in any way before. And 240,000 people came through the security system process in that inauguration. 4 years later, because of COVID, working with the team that had been at every inauguration for 50 years, we decided we want to have this outside. It needs to be in a place where the world will see us having the transition of power that they're used to seeing in America. But only 1,900 people came to that inauguration in that inauguration, and in dealing with all the things you deal with there. But understanding the importance of the peaceful transition of power, understanding that our system isn't perfect. So sort of I set the theme for one was the first one was the peaceful transition of power. The other was a more perfect union, and the point is that the founders didn't promise a perfect union. They promised in the Constitution a goal was a more perfect union. And we are constantly trying to be more than we have been and are less than we hope to be.
You are one of the few people in Congress with extensive experience as a local and statewide election official. In fact, before doing this interview, I listened to your excellent discussion with Breonna Lennon and Eric Fay about your time as Secretary of State and Greene County Clerk, which by the way, I highly recommend people listen to that. But I think it's pretty clear now there are a lot of people in Missouri in particular, especially Republicans, that do not have the faith in the results of elections that maybe they did before Trump was in office. What do you think leaders need to do to ameliorate that or make people confident in their elections again?
Well, I always thought it was an important part of the job that people believed that the election results accurately reflected what people tried to do election day, and that the county clerk in bigger counties than Springfield, Missouri, where I was the county election official, that's an important part of what you're doing as you prepare people for the election, as you talk about the election, as you give plenty of notice when things are going to be different or you believe things are improving, why you think they're improving. That's important. And then, to be the Secretary of State also, I thought it was really important to do that. And it continues to be an important part of the job. I think one of the big challenges in the country right now is we let people vote earlier and earlier, and not just on election day, where it's pretty easy to have a system that produces a quick result. These election officials need to be thinking about what do they need to do to change their system so that the result comes quicker. If you're going to let people vote, 6 weeks before the election, maybe I'll have a deadline that really matters as to when that vote has to be in. And, what Missouri does, what Florida did with lots of absentee and mail-in voting, is they have a system that allows them to be ready to count all those ballots on election day and announce it that night. The longer you drag out the result, and particularly when the apparent result seems to change over that 3-day or 3-week process, all you do is encourage people to further question why you can't do a more efficient job and a more accurate job of letting them know what happened on the day that is supposed to be election day.
So your departure from the electoral scene, by the way, I did not know before listening to that podcast that you have been in elected office since you were 23 years old, with maybe that 4-year break in the 90s as the only time you were not in elected office.
I was a university president during those 4 years, so that was my most political period.
But it seems like people like you, Kit Bond, John Ashcroft, John Danforth, you all kind of came of age in a time when Missouri Democrats were still a force in Missouri. And I think that was probably one of the reasons why you had to take a bipartisan approach on things. When they controlled the legislature, they controlled other statewide offices. Now you have Republicans who are ascending to high statewide and federal offices who have been in the majority their entire times. Your successor, Senator Schmidt, has never been in the minority before, and he will after January. Do you think that that's kind of a not good thing, and they may be approaching politics in a different way than people like you?
Well, the only real experience I have would be in our state. There've been lots of states that have been dominated by one party for a long time. We weren't very competitive for a long time. When I was elected Secretary of State, I was the first Republican to hold that job in 52 years. And it does impact how you explain to people why they should vote for you. Very much performance oriented, very much, I understand this job. I've done more of it than any other elected official in Missouri for the last 12 years as the county clerk and election authority in the biggest county where somebody had that responsibility. And then eventually, they find out that you're a Republican, but you need to have them pretty persuaded that you're a person that could do this job if you had a chance before the thing you wouldn't want to start with is, look, you've never elected a Republican to this job for 52 years, so just vote for me. I don't think it would have been very effective. And so our message was different. And I think the communication of the job you did then in government was different as well, because rather than talking about some national position of your party and how it related to everything you did, you were talking about the job you did and how you were doing your best to make that job that job better.
We only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to do a lightning round. And
okay.
What is your favorite Missouri state park?
Might be Roaring River, where I started trout season as the Secretary of State for several years. St. Genevieve is a state park we turned into a federal park while I was there, so it would be high on that list.
Who is your favorite Missouri political figure who is not Harry S. Truman?
I was going to go Truman once you started down that road. Favorite political person, not Harry S. Truman. I haven't thought about that in a long time. I'm not sure I've got a good answer on that.
You should have answered Champ Clark, but I'll forgive you for that. I'm a Champ Clark mega fan for reasons I'm not going to explain.
I read somewhere the other day that Champ Clark in I think it was 2000. I think it was 1915. The Democrats didn't have the majority, but they still elected. The Congress still elected him the speaker, which had to say something.
Highly recommend his autobiography when you have some time. Who is your favorite athlete who played for a Missouri sports team?
Stan Musial.
Which is a better place, Worth or Mercer County?
Worth is smaller. Mercer is bigger. They're equally good.
Yeah, I chose the two smallest Missouri counties. And my final question for you, what are you going to do next?
I don't know, but I'm going to work. I like to work. I don't have enough hobbies not to work. And my wife tells me I definitely need to work. So I'm looking forward to it. And I'm going to get serious about that on January the 4th.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for your time. And more importantly, thank you for your service to the state. I would say that if you were a Democrat, a Whig, a natural law party person, thank you so much, and thank you for your time today talking about your legacy.
Hey, Jason, thank you. I've loved doing it. I'm grateful to Missourians for giving me the opportunity at the county level, the state level, and the national level to work for them.
For all of our stories and coverage about Missouri politics, be sure to go to our website at stlpr.org. I'm Jason Rosenbaum, and thank you for listening.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.